Welcome to The Mind of Money. My name is Douglas Lodmell, and my guest today is extremely well-known author, economist, futurist in some sense, Doug Casey. You may know Doug from Casey Research, from The International Man, his initial book, and Crisis Investing of the 80s. Doug, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Doug. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure to have you. And you know, I don't quite know what to call you. An economist. I mean, you're really well respected and well followed, extremely well followed, and your message is something that I really am interested in. But how do you see yourself? I mean, what do you?
Well, we should define the word economist,
Yeah.
and everybody really should be an economist, because an economist is somebody who describes the way the world works. An economist is somebody that describes the way people go about getting what they want, producing and consuming in the material world.
Right.
So from that point of view, everybody should be an economist. And it's unfortunate that most of the people today that are called economists, people like Paul Krugman and Joseph Stiglitz, it's degrading to the Nobel Prize that
That's
these
right.
people have them. But these people are not economists.
Yeah.
What they are is they're political hacks. They're political apologists.
Right.
They don't describe the way the world does work. They describe the way they think it ought to work.
In a box, in a theoretical box.
Theoretical box. And they whisper their solutions, most of which are ridiculous, to politicians to enforce upon society.
Yeah.
So, but I like to think of myself as being a real economist. But I'm not sure you can make a living being an economist. So by trade, I'm a speculator. And I would define a speculator as somebody who takes advantage of politically caused distortions in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. So as a speculator, which is a fascinating way to see yourself, because really speculation is a fundamental understanding based on your economist vision of yourself in a way that allows you to make a choice, place a bet.
Exactly. When I have my economist hat on, I find out what the distortions and misallocations of capital are, and as a speculator, I put that hat on and say, now how am I going to profit from those things? And I'd like to be an investor, and I define an investor as somebody that puts capital someplace to make the capital grow through production. But increasingly in today's world, it's very hard to be an investor. It's very hard to do that, the way Warren Buffett became famous for doing it. And I expect that Warren Buffett is going to run up on the shoals of the investment world in the years to come.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting distinction, because most of the people watching this show, most of my clients, most of the people that are interested in this conversation would certainly see themselves as investors. And I like the distinction of speculator because it's a much more accurate way in which I think today's landscape has to be read. I don't know how to invest today. I really don't. And as an asset protection attorney, I've spent my career focusing on protecting my clients from an unlikely but potentially devastating event. And so we put asset protection in place to protect from that. Usually, or in the past 15 years, I've seen that event as a lawsuit. Today, I see that event as just pure financial risk. Lawsuits are now really way down the list of things that I think are highly probable or more probable. And economic crisis in the form of either straight up economic crisis that destroys your capacity to earn income, financial currency crisis, which destroys the money that you have to purchase anything, and then political crisis, which directly affects your life in a way to do anything.
Well, and that is especially perverse because the risk of a devastating lawsuit is far greater now than it's ever been.
Right.
But still, what you're saying is that's taken second place to these other things,
right.
even though it's worse than
right.
ever. So no, you're absolutely correct about that. And the reason why most people don't see this coming is because we've had a huge boom since the end of the Second World War. Because actually the Great Depression, which started in 1929, didn't end until about 1947.
Right.
It didn't end until the war was over. And by the time the war ended, and shortly thereafter, there were so many distortions and misallocations in the economy that they had to be washed out. So we started from a fairly clean slate after World War II. And since then, we've had tremendous increases in technology, which has increased the standards of living of people all around the world.
Massive.
That's been very helpful. But, and of course, the average guy has tried to produce more than he consume and save the difference. And that's also increased the standard of living around the world. So we've had these two things that have been wonderful going on for the last 60 years. And why can't it go on forever? Well, in a free market world, it would go on forever because technology will continue increasing, the average guy will continue producing and saving. So if we lived in a free market world, things would get better and better. But unfortunately, we don't live in a free market world, and it's less and less the case that we do now. The government has made tremendous inroads into the society and has corrupted the way people produce and consume a great deal. Indeed, at this point, about half of the people in the United States live off the government. By that I mean half of the people in the U.S. don't pay a federal income tax. Now, I don't want to see anybody pay a federal income tax. I don't believe in taxes from a strictly philosophical point of view. But you're looking at a time bomb when half of the people in the country pay income taxes and the other people don't. And most of the people that don't pay are slopping at the public trough in some way. In fact, a lot of the people that do pay income taxes are slopping at the public trough, like all the guys on Wall Street, for instance.
Yeah, the ones that make the most are absolutely, you know, gorging themselves at the public trough at the expense of the rest of us.
And in the meantime, the government has, things would have gotten better anyway after the last depression ended, but by inflating the currency in the several ways that they're able to do it, this has created even more distortions in the economy. It's created the business cycle, where you have 5 years of expansion, then there's a crisis, and things straighten out a little bit, 5 years of expansion, and another crisis. And I'm of the opinion that beyond these cyclical movements, which have gotten everybody into the habit of thinking that, well, there's always a little crisis and things get better, that we're really in a super cycle that's been going on for about 60 years. And it's going to come unglued in a catastrophic way. In fact, it started to come unglued. I say that there's something that I call the Greater Depression, because it's going to be much worse and much different than what happened in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s.
How? How different?
Well, for one thing, the last depression was, in my opinion, caused, well, it's not, I don't think it's just a matter of my opinion, I think it's a matter of fact, was caused by the creation of the Federal Reserve and the fractional reserve banking system, which started in 1913. And there were other distortions in the economy that were cranked in by the creation of the income tax in 1913. Other distortions that were cranked in by the First World War. But the point that I'd make is that we've had a very long run that in many ways has been artificial in nature. It's like if I were to take or the government were to take $1,000 and deposit in everybody's bank account on a Sunday night. Everybody would wake up on a Monday morning, They'd look, they have $1,000 in their bank account that they didn't have before. They'd feel they were richer than they were. Right. So what do you do when you're richer than when you
spend?
You go out and spend, okay? So what happens when business gets all this additional spending from this extra $1,000 that everybody's found? Well, you go out and hire more workers.
Expand.
You build new buildings. You know, a swimming pool company calls the copper company to make more pipes for it. And so it's a wonderful boom, okay? Yeah. Unfortunately, that's what's been going on for the last 60 years with cyclical retrenchments. Yeah. At this point, however, these distortions and misallocations of capital because of the inflation caused by the government, and it's much more complex and much worse than just putting $1,000 in everybody's bank account, because not everybody gets $1,000. Some people get a lot more, and then through the fractional reserve system. So this is a whole other discussion that we can have. But at this point, the distortions have become so ingrained in society that it's actually changed the psychology of the average man. He thinks that the dream world that we've been living in is the real world.
Right.
And I think we're going to have a real comeuppance here.
I think you just quoted Morpheus from The Matrix. The dream world, he thinks the dream world is really the real world.
Yes,
Neo, welcome to the real world.
Unfortunately, most people are not ready to be unplugged from the Matrix.
No, they're not. Well, and you know, in 1929, we had the Fed for just a few years, just enough time to screw it up the first time. We didn't have the debt that we had. We didn't have the money supply. We didn't have the devaluation of the currency to the extent that it is now. We basically just taken that game and just run it on turbochargers, you know, almost like a drug-fueled binge that has lasted 100 years. I mean, 1913, we're ready to hit 2013. The value of the dollar has vanished by, what is it, 94%, 96%?
Well, if you use the government's official figures, it's a bit over 95%. But the official figures that the government gives underestimate the amount of devastation they've caused to the currency.
I mean, the dollar used to really buy something. And we've gotten used to, I think that your point about the psychology of the average man is maybe the most important point, because we have been trained that this is normal, that we just can erode ourselves, and that's part of what's supposed to be happening.
Well, people think the debt is normal, but the point is that when you save money, you're putting off current consumption so that you can consume more in the future.
Right.
But the opposite of savings is debt. So when you take on debt, you're consuming now from either what you're going to do in the future or from capital you've accumulated in the past. So debt is a very serious thing.
Right.
And consumer debt especially, because if you have a business debt, then presumably you've taken the capital that other people have saved and you've allocated in a way to create more wealth. Okay, so that's business debt. But most of the debt we have today is consumer debt, which doesn't create anything. Okay,
it just basically creates more spending now.
It's just living above your means. And the same is true of government debt, which doesn't create anything. So I think we've reached a point where it really can't go on much further, which is one reason why the Federal Reserve and the government in general has tried to depress interest rates to the level that they are today, as low as they are, because the government officially owes $16 trillion.
Right.
Now, that's financed very short term today. There's not a lot of long-term government debt out.
And financed at virtually 0%.
Virtually 0%.
Yeah.
But still, it's about $300 billion they're spending on that. So interest rates, when they go up, back up to the levels that they were in the early 80s, and I think they're going to have to go far beyond that. At that point, just the interest on the debt of the government alone.
Completely unsustainable.
Completely. It's much more than annual tax revenues, the interest alone. And then you can forget about the fact that most of the spending is for things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, those three things alone are about 60% of the federal budget.
Well, and you know, David Walker, the chief economist to Congress, quit his job in protest about 5 years ago, went out on the road with what he called the fiscal wake-up tour, and his numbers are that we're not looking at $16 trillion worth of debt. We're looking at $54 trillion on top of that, unfunded liabilities. You add to that the real, true shadow banking system debt, and we're well over $100 trillion. It is, I explained this to a client, and a client that didn't have a background in finance in any way, shape, or form. And after about 10 minutes, she said, "But this is a Ponzi scheme."
Of course.
You're right.
Of course, it's a Ponzi scheme, just as Social Security is a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah.
It's a pity. People have paid money into Social Security, and this has had all kinds of negative aspects to it. They think that they think that they're saving for their retirement, but they're not. The government's made a promise, but it's spent that money, and you're looking at the next generation to pay off the last generation. The problem is that at this point now, we have only 4 workers for every retiree.
Right.
It's going to have 3 workers for every retiree.
Right.
The government spent all that money. It has nothing but debt.
Right, right. And then we run into Harry Dent's point of demographics. The baby boomers have hit the 50 mark. The bubble has passed. Where do we go after this? This big spending is happened, and the big borrowing on top of that.
Yeah, it's going to end quite badly. And there's even more to it than that. The fact is that for the last 30 years, the U.S. as a political entity has been exporting mainly dollars. Yep. And those nice foreigners have been sending us Sonys and Mercedes and cocaine, I don't know, lots of things
both sides of the equation
that come in. But we've been shipping out dollars to them by the
truckload,
boatload. Exactly. Roughly $600 billion a year go out as a balance of trade deficit now. And at this point, there are about 7 trillion US dollars that are floating around outside the United States. So we've gotten all these good consumer goods in, and they've gotten all these dollars. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, foreigners are starting to realize that the dollar is just the unbacked liability of a bankrupt government. Yeah. And there are no legal tender laws that extend abroad. Yeah. Americans have to use the dollar. That's why it says legal tender on it, because it's the law. You have to use the dollar. You have to use it.
It's obligatory.
But those $7 trillion owned by foreigners, they don't have to use them. They can dump them. Mm-hmm. And what they're going to do at some time, I think in the very near future, is they're going to panic and they're going to run for the exits at once. And all those dollars are going to come back home to the U.S. in trade for wheat and Boeings, but mainly title to U.S. assets. Mm. And this is going to impoverish the residents of this geographical entity we call the United States.
Well,
and also, when those $7 trillion come back here, you're going to have that many more dollars competing for that much less wealth, and it's going to explode inflation. Mm-hmm. And at that point, any other foreigners that have dollars are going to want to dump them. Mm-hmm. And that's one argument for having much, much higher levels of inflation here in the U.S.
Well, very glad you brought up this point, because this is a very interesting distinction between the understanding of how much money is out there and what it coming home does, and the fundamental base of our financial system, our money system. We talked a little bit before this about my conversation with Bob Prechter. He's the ultimate deflationist. So his point is that when this happens, when those foreigners get scared, they're going to do something. The question is what they're going to do. One option is what you just painted, is that they take their dollars and they go run for the exits and they buy whatever they can get. The other option is that the first reaction is not that they take the dollars, that they take everything else and they run to the dollars. Because the dollar still, for the moment, is the flight to safety option. Because the yuan is certainly not there. The euro is imploding as we speak. There's simply not enough gold to make gold a viable, immediate option for the entire world.
That's not true.
Okay.
That's not true. It's a question of the price of gold.
Yeah, clearly.
There are about 6 billion ounces of gold
Yep.
above ground. A lot of that's used in ornaments and jewelry and so
Yep.
forth.
Easily convertible back into bars.
Easily convertible back into bars. That's right. So the question is what's the correct price of gold for there to be enough of it to be used? At $35 an ounce, which it used to be before 1971, well, clearly there's not very much of it.
Yeah.
At 1,650, where it is as we talk, we're getting there. I think that I'm just guessing because I don't know how many currency units are going to be destroyed in the future through bankruptcies, through bank collapses. So there's an argument we could have catastrophic deflation. There's another argument that we could have runaway inflation.
Or both.
Or both in sequence.
Yeah.
It's possible. It's quite possible. This is why I'm a believer in gold as being the basis of what you should own financially, because gold is the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability.
Right.
And when you have a CD at the bank,
Yeah.
it's the bank's liability.
That's right.
In addition to the fact that the dollars that the CD is denominated in are the U.S. government's liability. So you've
Right.
got a double liability.
Yeah.
So that's why I like gold. Gold has been used throughout recorded history
Right.
as money. And I think it's very important to debunk something that Keynes said, that gold is a barbarous relic. This is ridiculous. Gold is money for 5 reasons that Aristotle spelled out in the 4th century BC. Well, he spelled this out. He was defining what is a good money.
Right.
A good money has to have 5 characteristics. Has to be durable, divisible, convenient, consistent, and have value of itself. Let's take a look at those. Durable. That's why we don't use wheat as money, because it'll rot after a season.
Right.
Divisible. That's why we don't use artwork as money. You can't make change for the Mona Lisa or whatever. Convenient. That's why we don't use lead as money. It just takes too much of it to carry around with you.
Is it really in today's digital world, with the amount of money that we're talking about, could we call gold convenient?
Yes, absolutely. But let me finish the last 2.
Okay.
Consistent. That's why we don't use real estate as money, because every piece is different from another. And last, value in and of itself, which is why we don't use paper as money. Or if we use paper, it doesn't last long. Those dollars in your pocket used to be receipts for a certain amount of gold in the treasury. $20 bill would get you a double legal coin. You change one for the other. Paper is more convenient. But it's become so degraded that people have forgotten that the real money was the gold, not the paper. And this has kind of been lost in the collective memory since 1933.
I think people are hyper aware of it. I just don't think that they get what we're talking about, that there's this argument of what you're talking about, where we need to go back to something completely stable that can't just be inflated away on the government side.
Exactly.
That makes complete sense, and I don't know anybody thoughtful that disagrees with that. I mean, that just makes sense. The question is how are we going to make it through this transition? Because right now, you can't pay for anything in gold. You have to trade it back for paper dollars. And since we made gold no longer legal tender, since we've disconnected them, we've got this translation mechanism that the gold is literally buried underneath the fiat currency, which is a small little triangle on top of a huge inverted pyramid, which is the debt-based money. My fundamental biggest concern is that the debt-based money is what comes crashing down. And then the first response is going to be run to the fiat money, because I got bills to pay, I got food to buy. After that is when I really get confused, because from there people are going to figure out, wait, this is all paper. Then where do we go? And then maybe it is gold.
Well, in 2007 and 2008, the whole inverted pyramid of debt almost came crashing down.
Almost completely, yeah.
And the fools that Time magazine and other things like that, called Bernanke a hero for keeping the banks from having failed. But how did they do that? You see, we almost had a catastrophic deflation where these banks, their assets are worthless mortgages and this type of thing. The bank would have
mispriced derivatives that nobody rehypothecated 5 times over.
Yes, of course. That's right. So it almost came crashing down back then.
Yeah.
And what would that have meant? It would have meant that the average person who had money at Wells Fargo wouldn't have gotten it. It would have been just like
MF Global.
Right, exactly. Exactly correct.
Yes.
Or what happened in the 1930s.
Yes.
Same thing would have happened. Now, that would have been a bad thing, but since in the real world actions have consequences and cause has effect, if you inflate the currency, it'll create this huge pyramid of debt for decades. There are going to be consequences. That's one of them, okay?
Right.
That would have been better than what they've done.
I agree. Let it happen.
Let it happen.
Let the forest burn.
Because the good news is the real wealth in the world, the factories, the houses, the knowledge in people's heads, skills, that all would have existed.
Right.
It just would have rewarded people that had allocated their money prudently and punished those who didn't.
Yeah.
But instead, they decided to crank it up further by bailing out all these banks, which had the side effect of making these guys who were already very wealthy, keeping the game going for them.
Yeah.
So
it's a sickness.
And it's going to wind up destroying the dollar because now every time a bank looks like it's going to fail, or even a major industrial corporation, they started this back in the 1970s when they bailed out Lockheed, the aerospace company, for only $250 million. That was the first time they did it. And then Penn Central, which they nationalized. But $250 million back then, that was a huge scandal. Now it's not even a rounding error.
It's totally. Yeah.
So I expect that what they're going to do with these so-called quantitative easings, which to me is disgusting, that what it means is printing money. That's what it. That's what
digitally
it means.
going.
Exactly.
Hitting the printing press.
That's exactly what it's doing. It's inflating the currency. And everybody calls it quantitative easing, like that's a better thing or a different thing.
Well, it's good marketing. They have great spin at the Fed, I mean.
But in addition to destroying the currency, they're destroying the language, which is the way that people even can communicate. So the whole thing is corrupt.
Yeah.
Well, are we going to have, in other words, we're faced with two alternatives. One, where your dollars are in the bank, they're worth more, but you can't get them because the bank has failed, corporations have failed, bonds have failed.
Yeah.
So there's not much money. All this debt has just been wiped
crumbled
down.
Yeah.
And if we have a deflation, the dollar, even though the dollar would still be the unbacked liability of a bankrupt government, for a while it would be worth more.
A lot more.
That's
likely.
right. And that's the deflation argument.
Yeah.
But the government is much, much more powerful now than it was in the 1930s.
Yeah.
The Federal Reserve is much more powerful. Everybody is relying on the government. They think it's like a magic cornucopia now, which they didn't back in those days. So that they will bail out any bank. They'll bail out insurance companies when they fail. They'll bail out major corporations when they fail. And they'll do this by crediting their accounts with dollars.
Yeah.
So either could happen. The only thing that I can predict with certainty is that we're going to have a financial catastrophe of historic proportions, and it's going to be financial chaos.
Yeah.
So what should you do during this? I don't think you should rely on the dollar. I think that you should rely on gold because, I'll repeat it again, it's the only financial asset that's not simultaneously somebody else's liability.
Either that or ammunition.
Well, actually, that's
I know a guy who took $500,000. He bought the 5 most popular calibers, and he's got it in storage underground in Nevada.
Well, actually, that's very prudent because it's unlikely that the government will illegalize guns It's more
they'll
likely
go for
that
the ammunition.
they'll
Yeah.
tax ammunition and make it very, very expensive
Yeah,
and hard to
right.
get. They'll say, well, the Second Amendment, sure,
Here's your gun.
get your guns, but what are you going to do with them? There's no ammunition. So
right.
he's actually a smart guy.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
That's
really...
a good, and that is a good speculation.
That's a speculation.
You just need a lot of storage space for $500,000 worth
it's a
of
lot
ammunition.
a lot of ammunition. Well, I really appreciate, Doug, that I mean, it's very thoughtful, and what you're saying, I hope everybody gets this who's watching this, is that we don't know, and anybody who comes and says, I know that this is the outcome because here's the chain of events, has really closed their eyes in the last 10 years, because I think the biggest point that I'm hearing is the size and commitment of the government and their willingness to intrude into this and try to force an outcome. And we know what happens when you try to force an outcome. You usually get that outcome for a while. But ultimately, that forced, all that energy runs up against true power of the market, of the people waking up to what's going on, and ultimately there's a price to pay.
Well, it's going to be a big price because half of the people in the United States are dependent on the government at this point. And I'm afraid that when the present system collapses, and it is going to collapse for a lot of reasons that we don't have the time to talk about here, that I'd like to think that the United States would return to its roots, which is to say free minds, free markets, no government intrusion, taxes and so forth. But like any living entity, the government's prime directive is to survive
and grow and morph into this monster that
exactly.
It's becoming. Yeah.
So the chances are not bad that after the present system collapses, and right now we're in the eye of the hurricane.
Yeah,
we went into the hurricane 2007, 2008.
Yeah.
It was ugly. They've papered it over with trillions of new currency units. Now we're in the eye of the hurricane, but we're going to come out the other side of the storm, and it's going to be much, much worse and last much, much longer than the other side. Now, the question is...
what do you do?
What do you do? What's going to happen? I'm afraid that the government is going to grab the economy in a stranglehold and throttle it to death. So this could last for years and years. So what do you do? I think your biggest danger is actually political.
Yeah.
Your biggest risk is political. So you have to diversify, and this is something that Americans are not used to, because this has always been the freest country in the world, the richest country in the world.
Why would I want to go anywhere?
Why would you want to go anywhere?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you why, because things change. And in 1917, the Russians that weren't diversified outside of Russia were in for a sad surprise.
Yeah.
And in the 1930s, the Germans that weren't diversified out of Germany, they were in a lot of trouble. And the same thing for the Vietnamese in the 1960s. And all over the world, this happens. And I fear it may be the turn of the United States now. Well, and I don't even say America, because America to me is an idea, and it was an excellent and unique idea, but it's been replaced by the United States,
corporatocracy.
Exactly, which is just another nation state.
Yeah, right.
So you've got to diversify politically.
Well, I mean, again, my mission in life has been to protect from an unlikely but potentially devastating event. The single most competent idea I can think about at this moment in time in the United States is exactly what you're saying. Diversify politically. Move some of your money to a different political system, a different banking system, by the way, that is not so leveraged. Move it into precious metals, and consider what it looks like to be outside of the United States.
Absolutely, because it's a big world out there. The rest of the world is growing much more quickly than the U.S. is, especially the Orient, I've got to say.
Yeah.
And after things come unglued and settle out here some years in the future, you'll have assets that you can bring back in.
Yeah.
And this will be good for the people that are still in the United States, and it'll be good for you because you're going to be able to buy things for pennies on the dollar.
Pennies, yeah.
So there's every reason to do it.
Yeah.
diversify yourself.
And no reason not to, except for the mental block that somehow says that's too scary. Because
yes.
Americans really feel, frankly, just afraid of an international diversification.
Well, that's very foolish, because if they don't diversify, what they are is they're thinking like they were medieval serfs,
Yeah.
where they're born in one place, they grow up there, and they never even go 10 miles across that next hill because there might be dragons or something.
Yeah.
And that's the mentality that too many of our countrymen have. And it's time that they take the blinders off and diversify around the world.
So, give me a sketch. What does that look like for the average guy? He has a couple of $1,000,000, he has a good business, he has a home that's probably mostly paid for, if not paid for. He's set. If everything were going to stay the same, he's actually just fine. But what's your recipe for him?
Okay, well, he's got to stop acting like a plant, which is not a good survival strategy for a person.
Okay.
So he's got to diversify. What's he going to do? First of all, real estate. This is where most people have perhaps most of their wealth.
Yeah.
I've been a bear on real estate for years, and I've got to say I'm still a bear, because real estate in the United States is built on a pyramid of debt.
Correct.
You can't buy it, you can't sell it without mortgages.
That's right.
And this is very problematical because of what's going to happen to the dollar and what's going to happen to the interest rates, which are now at their lowest levels.
And we've seen what happens when you pull the debt of capacity. The real estate just crumbled immediately. There was not even a lag time. It was just...
So real estate's already off 20, 30, 40, even 50%.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's going to get worse because during the last depression, real estate was hit as badly as the stock market in the United States, and it wasn't nearly as leveraged as it is now.
Right.
And in addition to that, since it's time to eat the rich here in the United States, real estate is the most obvious sign of wealth.
Yeah.
All these local governments are bankrupt, and you're going to find real estate taxes going way up. This is not good.
Yeah.
So I'm bearish on real estate.
Okay.
The other thing that I think a lot of people have money in is bonds, in the bond market.
Okay.
It's a triple threat to your capital to be in bonds. Number one, bonds are denominated in dollars, and dollars are a floating abstraction. They're going to reach their intrinsic value, which is nothing.
Right.
So that's the first thing about bonds. Second thing about bonds is interest rates are now at all-time lows. When interest rates inevitably go up, which they will, that's a different discussion as to why I say that, but bonds fluctuate inversely with interest rates.
Right.
So that's going to be devastating.
And just a few points of interest rates means 30 or 40% of the value of your bond is just gone.
From here it does, yes, that's correct.
Right.
And the last thing is the creditworthiness of the issuer.
Right.
Now, of course, the U.S. government will always pay off its bonds by printing up more money. Sure. I mean, they control the... But how about municipal bonds? How about corporate bonds? They may not be able to pay off. So bonds are a triple threat to your capital. And to me, as a speculation, being short bonds right now is almost a no-lose proposition. Yeah. So let's forget about real estate. Let's forget about bonds. The stock market at least represents a real asset, the things these corporations own. But even though it's a real asset, the question is, what's the value of the stocks? Now, in 1933, when the stock market hit bottom, the Dow Jones, which had already cut dividends a lot, was yielding 12 to 13%. Right now, the stock market, depending on which index we look at, is yielding 2, 3%, 4%, something like that. The stock market's no bargain at this point. Yeah. So I have no interest in the stock market. Okay. So now where are you going to go? I think farmland does make sense. I like farmland for a lot of reasons. But I think it's critical that the average person build a significant portion in gold and silver. Okay. And I hate saying that now that gold is over $1,600 and silver.
It's expensive right now. I mean, it really is.
It's not the bargain that it used to be, but look at it this way. In 2001, okay, gold had gone through a bear market from reaching its peak at $800 in 1980, and then it fell to $250 in 2000. So it had a 20-year bear market with lots of fluctuations along the way. The fact is that at $250 in 1980, gold was cheaper in real terms than it was at $35 in 1980. Okay? So gold has gone up 6 times since then. But during the bull market of the 1980s, it went up over 20 times, from 35 to 800. And the situation's much, much more serious now financially and economically than it was then. So I think gold is going to $10,000 an ounce.
Wow.
I hate to say that in terms of today's dollars. If they go completely insane, then
who knows?
Who knows? I hope it's not like Germany in the 1920s. But you have to buy gold, you have to buy silver, and you have to put it outside of the United States. So
do you see a possibility where they could actually do what they did in the 30s and make owning gold illegal?
It's impossible to predict what psychological aberrations politicians will evidence. But let's put it this way. Very, very few people in the United States own gold. And the people that do own gold could be painted as being unpatriotic, not believing in the dollar, not believing in the U.S.
Organizations.
Well, who knows? Who knows what kind of lies they'll come up with. So it's better to be safe than sorry. And you also are diversifying yourself internationally. So put your gold in Switzerland. That's still good, although not as good as it used to be. Go to the Orient, put it in Hong Kong, put it in Singapore. Or you can just bury it in your backyard and not tell anybody about it.
We're going to end up with a bunch of little pirate maps for leaving for our kids of where our stuff is.
Well, this happened during, in Rome when the barbarians invaded. The same thing happened.
Well, it is an interesting point, and I talked to Bob Prechter about gold, and he's a fan of gold. He's the ultimate deflationist, and at the same time, he considers gold real money. What I think is interesting about gold is not that it will be necessarily $5,000 or $10,000 an ounce. It might be $600 an ounce, but what it will buy will still be what it bought. So the old saying of, an ounce of gold will buy you one good suit has really held true. So even as a deflationary hedge, you don't lose value if you go into gold. As an inflationary hedge, clearly you're ahead of the game if you use it as an inflationary hedge. As a deflationary hedge, you're not a speculator. You're not going to make money, but you will retain value.
I agree with you, Doug. And I think that the average American has to get some gold, put it in his hand so he can know what his great-grandfather felt like when he had gold in his hand. So buying gold is pro-American. But what I'm afraid of is that as the government creates trillions more dollars in the future, which they will do, those dollars are going to go someplace. And those dollars are going to create other investment bubbles. Just as the government created the bubble in the stock market in the 90s, it created the bubble in real estate up to 2007. There are going to be other bubbles that are going to be created as they create trillions more of these currency units. So what you want to do, you're going to be forced. Everybody's going to be forced to be a speculator. It's going to destroy the middle class in this country because unfortunately the middle class, which is the part of the society that saves, and they're accustomed to saving with dollars. But those dollars are hot potatoes. So the middle class is going to be devastated in the years to come, and they're going to be forced to become speculators to maintain their wealth. They're going to be trying to buy something, sell something, make a gain here to outrace the depreciation of the currency. So I'm always looking for speculations to be ahead of the crowd.
I think that's a brilliant point, and I hadn't thought of it that way, but you're right. We're all being pushed to be a speculator, and ultimately that's you better get good at it.
It's very unfortunate because if we lived in a free market world, speculators would be unemployed because there wouldn't be politically caused distortions to capitalize on. We wouldn't be looking at chaos like this that we have to defend ourselves from. But we don't live in that kind of a world. Hopefully we will again in the future, but things are going to have to sort themselves out a lot.
I'll tell you my speculation, and here's my personal feeling, is that we are going to have a real increase in the dollar value as we have an initial flight to safety, as people don't know what to do. And that's where you're going to be able to take your dollars and buy a whole bunch of gold.
That's entirely
then
possible.
Then you can wait it out with the gold as we finally figure out that the currency is literally going to just fall off the face of the map, and we'll see what shakes.
That's an intelligent plan. It is. I think that because whether we're going to have deflation or inflation is unpredictable at this point.
It is.
It's wise to have some dollars. It's wise to have some gold. It's wise to have lots of assets outside the United States, productive assets. That, and keep producing more than you consume in the meantime. This is a time to cut back on your production when it's still under your control. Cut back on your consumption while it's still under your control voluntarily, because the market's going to make you do it. Produce more than you consume and save the difference. The question is, save it in what? And for the time being, as we speak now in April of 2012, yes, have some dollars in case it's a deflation. Yes, have some physical gold. And keep your eyes open for speculations, because there's going to be immense volatility in the marketplace.
Well, I think that's great advice.
And diversify internationally.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I mean, travel, go figure it out, find countries you like, find assets that you like, talk to people that are professionals in this area. There's a whole world out there that is so much bigger than the average American is used to. Not only that, but it's fun.
It's fun. It's both fun and profitable. Absolutely. I've been to 175 countries. I've lived in 12, and I don't regret any of the travel that I've done.
Well, it gives you perspective. It's the single greatest thing, and it's what most Americans don't give themselves, that gift. They really don't. Well, I have one last question. Ask you to opine about where you think this is all heading in the long run. So I know, that we have some tough times, and there is a forest fire, and it's going to burn some stuff out. But, what do you think for the long run, and what is that long run in time frame for you?
The long run is, because I hate to sound bearish and gloom and doomy, which I know I have, but the long run future for mankind is not only better than we can imagine, but it's probably better than we can imagine. And my opinion is that the future of mankind lies in the planets and the stars, not on this little dirt ball circling an obscure star in one of billions of galaxies. So that's the view that I take, and I try not to take any of this stuff too seriously. Don't get too wrapped up in it. Keep it light. I mean, even countries that have been totally devastated, like Germany and Japan after the war, things get better, they come back. But in order for things to come back and get better, you need something you'll come back faster the freer the economy is. So I'm a believer in the maximum of personal freedom on all bases and the minimum of government intervention, because you've got to remember, the government's not your friend. The government is pure coercion. It comes out of the barrel of a gun, as Mao Tse-tung said. So hopefully after this period is over, America will go back to its roots when it had a small caretaker government and a maximum freedom. And that's hopefully where the future lies. But that's a way in the future.
Well, as was said in V for Vendetta, people should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
And that is one of my favorite movies.
It is a great movie. It's a great movie. Well, Doug, thank you so much. This was really a pleasure. I hope we get to do it again.
I look forward to it, Doug.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So, thank you for joining me on The Mind of Money, and we'll see you next time.